Today, I was grateful to have the opportunity to catch up with directors Jess Schmittling and Chris Fair as we dove into the Forever Home concept, the initiative that Extreme is working on to be a problem-solving solution to the ever-changing environment of youth sports. And Chris and Jess had great insight, great experience over the past bunch of years in their roles, and it was awesome to listen to why this concept is important for not only the families and the athletes, but also our coaches and directors. So thanks for joining and listening to Hardball Talks today, and I hope you enjoy this discussion on the Forever Home. What's up, guys? Welcome to Hardball Talks, the podcast where we bring stories, challenges, opportunities all around the intersection of sports and life. And today we are talking Extreme Baseball and Softball Club, and specifically around its new initiative, new theme heading into the 25th season of Extreme. And on today's podcast, I have Jessica Schmittling and Chris Fair, who are longtime directors of Extreme Baseball and Softball Club, and we will be talking about the last few years and what has been the focus of Extreme, how the growth in not only our club, but just in the region, the Midwest of baseball and softball continues to thrive, and what our focus is heading into a new year. So before we get started, maybe we'll just let you guys introduce yourself, or not necessarily introduce, but tell us a little bit more about yourself, and I'll ask a couple specific non-baseball and softball related questions. So, Chris, when you're not on a baseball field, where do you like to be?
Outside. I like to be outside. I like to play golf. I like to hunt, like to fish. I don't get to do any of those things as much as I would like, but I think most people would probably say that as well. So outside would be my short answer.
Yep. I think you're always a little bit of a secret weapon on a golf foursome. You got a nice little draw that I think surprises people. So I can see that as something you always enjoy. Jess, you're not on a softball field. Where do you like to be?
I get torn between probably, I really love to cook, so my kitchen would be one of the places, for sure, trying new recipes, things like that, but I think the other side would be anywhere on the water, whether that's a pool, in a boat, lake, something. I really enjoy the water.
Yep. I would say, just for myself, I like to be on the water too, so whether that, like you said, a lake or ocean or whatever it may be, and I like to be at my kids' sporting events. So, sometimes have the coach hat on, but it's also nice to have the fan hat on as well. What do you have? Tell somebody something that you have going on this weekend that is not baseball, softball related. We'll start with you, Jess. What's something you have going on this weekend, not baseball and softball?
Well, I get to go to the pool, so there we go.
Okay. There you go.
Get to be happy on the water.
Chris?
I'm going to go to a high school football game, and I have not, maybe ashamed to admit, I've not been to a high school football game in 20 years, maybe. But my boys are getting to the age where they're itching to go, and I'm newly the head coach at my alma mater, Civic Memorial, and so they've got their first home game tonight. So we're going to go catch a high school football game, and I'm excited about that for the weekend.
Yep. Well, I like you. I'm going to be at a football game too this weekend, maybe two of them, and that's a little bit of a newer sport for our family. Our older son has been playing football the last couple of years, so I'll be at a football field as well. All right. Well, we're going to dive in, and where we're going to start is the hashtag Win It Right. WINIT Right, RIGHT. That is a hashtag that Extreme commonly used around 2018-19, and has kind of continued over the last few years. Just start with you. What was Win It Right? What do you remember about why it came about? Why it became an important thing for our coaches and families? You please share on that.
Yeah, I'm actually representing the Win It Right logo today, so we get have it on fan gear as well. So I think the biggest thing with Win It Right is just the idea that yes, we want baseball and softball to be something that we're teaching and the foundations of just the skill and the sport in general, but when you hear the phrase "win it right," it's so much more than just the athlete, what they're going to produce at the end of the day on the field, but really just winning it right in life. And there's so many layers to that, but I think just the foundational aspect of being able to teach kids the quote unquote right way to play and what that looks like. And that could be from culture, it could be leadership. There's just, again, there's so many layers to that, but really that was the starter of Win It Right.
So when you say the right way, what's an example? So you said the right way and you said culture. So combine those together. What's the right way that's something culture related?
Yeah, I think like in youth sports in general right now, it's really hard to understand what it is to win it right or the right way to play because there's so many versions of that depending on how you're being brought up. And so to me, I think culture comes down to the fact that you're going to play something in a different way, different than the norm. And to me right now, the right way to play would be making sure at the end of the day, like, I mean, even down to how we wear uniforms, how we structure our dugouts, how we run and sprint on and off the field, and just giving it back to the game, giving the game the integrity it deserves. And those would be just kind of little examples here and there of what that
Yeah,
might look like.
yeah, that's great. Chris, Win It Right. What's it mean to you?
Yeah, I think I go back to just like the maybe the genesis of it of, when I got involved with Extreme, 10, 11 years ago. I think the focus was on culture of athletes and developing that, family feel and developing athletes, developing them through their, youth ages into high school, off into college, things like that. And I think that, early on there was maybe even a little bit of a thought of like, Extreme doesn't necessarily care about winning or something like that. And I think that that was a little bit of a reality check for us of like, no, we do care about winning. We maybe just don't lead with that. We don't lead with the trophies that our teams get or the scholarships that our players are earning. We weren't leading with that, and maybe we should a little more. But when we do lead with that, or when we do talk about that, we want to make sure that we're talking about it in the right light. So it's not just about that. It's not just about the trophies that we're winning or the big tournaments we're going to or the scholarships that they're earning. That stuff is important, but it's done in the right way. If the process is done correctly, if we're developing the right culture, developing the athletes correctly, like those things are going to be outcomes of it. The trophies and the scholarships and all that is going to be the outcome of it, but it can't necessarily be the end goal. And so I think that hashtag win it right encompasses all of that. It encompasses that we do want to win, we do want to be successful, but we want to do it the right way.
Yeah, and I think us three we were fortunate enough to be at an event recently where we had four alumni families who shared with our coaches about their experiences in Extreme, back in the day, and what they took from it, what they still remember, what was important to them when they made the decision to be in Extreme, and then when they graduated, what did they still notice about what they learned in Extreme still in their son or daughter, in adulthood. And never during that time, to your point, Chris, did they talk about exactly what tournaments they won or what trophies they got or what the record was for the year. They spoke on the experiences and the relationships and the values and the traits and the qualities that were learned, passed on, the mentorship, the camaraderie, and yeah, I think maybe towards the end of between 2015 and 2020, there was a lot of emphasis on winning and using the words, we win or we're going to win or how many, I remember seeing something of how many dollars of scholarships an organization gave away, or an organization's players received, whatever that was. And it's just, I think when Win It Right came out, it was making sure that athletes and coaches and families go a layer deeper and understand what's really going to resonate. And in our 25 years of experience, we have families that are telling us what resonates and what they remember as alums. So the Win It Right hashtag, and then let's fast forward a few years. The last 2-3 years, we've really seen baseball, softball, opportunities in college, beyond club ball. We've seen travel sports, youth sports grow at exponential levels, which has provided a lot of opportunities. Chris, talk a little bit about that growth. Why is it good? And then maybe why is it, what are the challenges with that?
Yeah, so the absolutely hit it on the head there, Brett. I mean, the last 20 years, we've seen the, club, we've seen select, we've seen travel, whatever title you want to give it. We've seen that grow so much, and there are a lot of positives to that. The opportunities for development, the opportunities for quality coaching, for playing high levels of ball, like that has all been very positive, and that's really shown at the end of the day. I was having a side conversation with somebody the other day, and they, we were talking about just specifically baseball in this area, how much it has grown and how much it has become more prominent even in the last 20 years. Like, I remember when I was in high school, you would always have one or two teams that would come out of this area and have a shot to win, a state championship. But it seemed like they wouldn't make it very far. They would get kind of beat out early on by a team from Chicago or a team from, the Northern Illinois area. I don't feel like that's as much the case anymore. It feels like the teams that come out of this area at whatever level, 1A, 2A, 3A, 4, whatever team comes out of this area has a good shot and likely goes on to win a state championship. And so, I think that's just a small testament of how the addition of club ball, travel ball, whatever you want to call it, has impacted the area really positively from a player development, from a competitiveness standpoint. But I think that the challenges of that can be that because it is so widespread, it can cause a stressful situation for families and for players as they kind of try to navigate all of that. We've seen things like at the lowest levels, we know how badly it's affected recreational baseball, and softball. And then as you kind of move up into and you get into the club world and the travel world, every year you're unsure of what your path is. Are you with the right club? Are you with the right trainers? Are you in the right ear of the right people that can help you kind of get to that next step? And because there is so many options, that also causes a little bit of stress for families, and there's never that known of what, what's the path, or who's on the bus with my son or daughter to get them to the next level, and who cares about them. And so I think that with all of the positives that have come from that and the level of play increasing, the stress to families has also increased. And so I think that's a real challenge. It's a real challenge. It's got to be talked about. It's got to be worked on.
Yep. And I guess that takes us to, something that I see, Jess, you and other directors really trying to be as problem solvers, really trying to take that problem, take that stress, and figure out how to be a solution to that. Maybe share on that.
Yeah, I think as Chris was kind of talking, I think there's just so much information out there, but that information, we're still actively learning it as we go. So you may have somebody posting out about the fact that your kid needs to be in, a recruiting program by the time they're X age, or, your kid needs to be in hitting lessons by this age. And all of these pieces of information, and it's so readily available to us, all the Facebook groups and things like that. So trying to figure out how to stay ahead as the expert of those things to be able to help our family specifically transition through all the different phases. We have to be able to have transitions from 8U to 10U to 12U, 13U, 14U, whatever that is, but that it supports the family and it continues to educate them on like, what does that transition look like for our family? What does my kid need? What's reality? What's being sold to me versus what they actually need to be successful towards the goals that they have. So I think the problem solving of that is trying to create a space that has all of those transitions for a family, not to feel like they have to go jump into something else because what they're reading on Facebook tells them that they've got to go find it elsewhere, or they don't feel like they're supported in the place that they are.
And when you say transitions, like what are some examples? What are examples of transitions that a young athlete is going to face?
Yeah, I think like even very early on from going from rec to the select world, like that's one transition of like, how do I even make that jump? What's the difference in time commitment for my family? That's probably the biggest thing people ask at that age. Is my kid ready for that? If I don't do it early enough, am I going to be too late into the sport? Those are a lot of just like the young conversations I feel like I have. And then I think as they are starting to understand what their goals are, if it's collegiate, if it's I want to be a varsity starter, when you're 13U, 14U having those conversations, that transition's also hard for families because I think there's, you've got a lot of recruiting type of programs that are out there that people can just go pay for and be on a platform and they feel like that's the right next step. But if no director or coach is in their ear to really share with them the whys behind that or what is the next step for my family, that gets a little lost in translation at times. And it just feels like the next thing they're supposed to do because they saw somewhere or another kid is doing it on their team or whatever. So I think that the really young youth transition is probably the biggest one next to that kind of elite transition.
Chris, what about you when you think of transitions? What do you see guys and girls facing?
Yeah, I think it's Jess hit it on the head there with a lot of it, but I think that the transitions from even starting at the young level of okay, I've maybe been introduced to the sport through a recreational level of some kind, and so now I want to get into the select level or the club level. And again, it's a positive and a negative, but there are many options for me. So and there's really no governing body kind of telling me how my athlete is going to kind of transition through that. So I'm a little bit on my own as a family to try to navigate that. So that's one transition. And then once I get into that, once I'm in the kind of select ball world, now I've got to make the transition. Okay, as my athlete grows and develops versus all the athletes around my athlete grow and develop, like is my athlete being served correctly? Are they on the right team? Are they not on the right team? Are they in the right program? So there's all those decisions to be made. And then as we get into the high school level, we have the goal of every athlete wants to be impactful for their high school team, but then they also have goals beyond that. Can they find the right fit inside of a college program? And so all of those things come into there's challenges with all of those, and so I think that being able to find a path and a journey for those athletes and then for them to be supported through all of those things, I think is really important.
Yeah. I mean, as you guys were talking, I was just writing down notes here, living my family's journey with one of my sons. He had the transition of he was in recreation, and then he had to transition to kid pitch. And what did that look like? And how were we going to do that? And then there was the transition of, you get to just before middle school, and some kids are bigger, some kids are smaller, some teams are winning, some teams are not. And navigating that as a family of, are we in the right spot? Are we falling behind? Are we ahead? And then, then you write down, then I wrote down, the transition of what is your kid's passion? Is your kid self-motivated? Does he want this journey on his own? Does he, what level does he want? Does he want to play high school? And then, then you get to where my son's at now, which is the level of competition and the transition of the different levels, locally, regionally, nationally, and throughout all of that, there's the need to be supported. There's parent peer pressure. There's, the market, peer pressure. There's noise. There's lots of noise. And I think, I was really reliving those transitions as you guys talked about how a club and a team and a coach and a director need to support families through those transitions. I think ultimately that, that's the journey. I use that word, the journey, the long-term focus, the process focus. Chris, maybe just share on, why is it important that a club, coaches, and families all focus on that process more so than, than getting stuck in those transitions or outcomes?
Yeah, I to me the process it's always the most important thing just in life in general, right? Because I think that, and especially when it comes to sports, I think we all have to remember that that whatever sport we're talking about, that's going to end at some point for our athletes. Like they're whatever that dream that they're chasing is going to end at some point. And so what's really important is once that's all over, what are we left with? What are we looking back on? What are we remembering? And so I think that gets hard to think about in the moment. In the moment, we want to think about, okay, getting my athlete on the best team, getting them with the best trainers, getting them that varsity spot in high school, getting them the scholarship, getting them to the best possible school. And so I think that when we think about like all those little individual goals and that's all we're shooting for, then whenever it ends, that we can be not left with very much. We can be not left with very much. And I'll kind of go back to an example you use, Brett, of like, when we hear families talk about like their experience, families that feel like they've had a good experience in sports, they don't tend to talk about, oh yeah, my son or daughter, they were an all-state third baseman and they got this scholarship to this place, and they don't talk about that stuff. They talk about, it's been so cool to be invited to the weddings of the families and the players that they used to play with. And, their coach that coached them for 2 or 3 years still checks up on them, and we have a relationship with them, and they get to come back to the place that they've, used to train at and train other athletes. And it's like, it's those like long-term things that
Right.
really have to be the focus. If the focus is just on, I got to get on the best team, or I got to work with the best trainer, or I got to get the highest level scholarship I can, like that stuff is that's a tough way to live. It's a tough way to live. It's a tough way to make decisions. And that's going to be a bumpy road. It's going to be a bumpy road. But if the process can be focused on and, enjoy the ride, as we say, then man, what a better experience at the end of the day.
Yeah, because I think even like the transitions, like it would be very easy, like Brett, when you were going through each of those transitions, to like just go out on Facebook and be like, what is the best organization or best team that's out there for my kid to go to Kid Pitch? Or what's the best team that's out there right now to help my kid get recruited? And so when you look at it as year to year like that in those transitions, you're missing the chance to really build a family. So like your transitions for your kid and all of those steps that they made along the way have the same close-knit group of people through all of that. And so I think that's the specialness of the process, is that you have the people to fall back on throughout all of those transitions, instead of feeling like you've got to start over every time a new transition happens, because they're throughout our game the whole time. But to be able to have a support system throughout that process is doing it differently.
Yeah, when we started those transitions, there really wasn't a place for us to go to ask those questions. There really wasn't a message board or an expert or a social media handle or a Twitter feed or that really didn't exist. So the research was probably fewer. So then, that probably forced us to work through some of those transitions in a manner that was hard at first, but rewarding on the back end. And I think now, as you're saying that, as my sons have gotten older, it's a little less family. It's a little less, close knit groups. But what has increased What has increased is the ability to go ask those questions and to go try to, find experts and find, different ways. I heard this, I heard about this. Have you seen this? Have you seen that? That's that flood of information, which is what you mentioned earlier, Jess. That flood of information, while it's, made things increasingly competitive, increasingly, higher level, if you will. It's also added a lot different conversations and a lot different paths for families to choose to get information. They're not maybe leaning so much in experience. The past 25 years. They're looking at, they're getting that future information quickly at their fingertips a little bit more, and it's made it a little less focused on the long term.
Yeah.
Well, I guess let's transition now. So we kind of talked about that focus of winning it right. We've talked about how the environment's changed and grown for the good and the tough and the stress level. Let's talk about the problem solving or the initiative that Extreme is trying to support families, coaches, and directors with, which is the Forever Home. So Jess, I'll start with you. The Forever Home, where did it come from? We're starting to see that around on Extreme, websites, social media pages. We're hearing coaches talk about it, families talk about it. What is that Forever Home concept to you?
Yeah, I think the Forever Home is a roadmap of all of those transitions. So it's trying to make sure we have a place and a support for whatever the athlete is going through. And it may feel a little simpler at the younger ages because you're just kind of going through, 8U, 9U, 10U, but you're sticking with the core of a team. And then from there, you're working your way into finding the right competitive level for your team. Like you kind of mentioned earlier, locally, regionally, nationally, whatever that is. And so throughout, kids navigating that, families navigating that, this is the home. So it doesn't feel like just because my kid all of a sudden is different in ability or different in their goals or different in, physically wherever they're at, then they don't have to then leave the program just to still have an experience. And instead, it takes into account all of those transitions and, allows like-minded athletes and families to continue to be on the path that spits them out as those people that got to come and sit in the room and talk with us at that meeting and be alumni, come back and be trainers, be coaches, whatever that is. And it creates that journey from youth all the way through till they're alumni.
I know, Chris, one of the goals of the Forever Home is to, try to bring back the enjoyment of that youth sport experience as a family, try to alleviate that stress, show those transitions. What's maybe share a little bit why that Forever Home concept you feel is so important.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the stress level of the families that feels, unnecessary. Again, it's created by that there is so much, there's so much opportunity in youth sports now. And so, but with that opportunity comes stress because, you never know, do you have a home where you are? Or even if you do have a home where you are, is the grass greener somewhere else? And so it just causes this stress level that's tough to deal with. And so I think that and that really should not be part of the youth sports experience. It should be a positive thing, right? It should be a positive thing. It shouldn't feel like this major stress. It should be a value add to a youth's family's life, not a stressor to their life. And so, we all see the memes and the things that are out on social that kind of poke fun of that, and we can all get a chuckle about those things. But at the end of the day, there's some sadness to those, right? That those are out there and that those are real things that happen. And so, I think that it's finding the way to make those things, make that Forever Home happen at a young age. So at a program level, two things that I think about is one, we talk a lot to our coaches about retention. We don't want to have massive turnover year to year with our teams inside of our club. We realize that turnover and transition is can be needed at times for making sure that athletes are placed in the right spots and that they're developing in the right areas and that the culture of teams is correct. But we don't necessarily want to have teams that are just wholesale making massive changes year over year, which we sometimes see when teams are just like, hey, I got to try to find the best, 12 players in the area at this age to go and be as competitive as we can be. Doesn't necessarily need to be like that. So I think retention is one thing, talking about retention. And then the second thing I think is just program wide having a home for everybody. If we have multiple levels within each age group, then typically we're able to have that home more likely, so that we don't have to have that. Okay, well, there's as little as possible of the, well, we just don't have a fit for your athlete right now. It happens, unfortunately, but I think that for us as club leaders, the more that we can prevent that from happening, the more we can provide that forever home, experience.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, I think, there's times when we take a hit or somebody makes a comment about us having multiple levels in our program, and we may put a tag on that, whether it's you have a metro level, you have a Midwest level, you have a national level, whatever that tag is. And it really is difficult because those levels are very targeted in our case, where we see athletes that they line up with a certain level, and sometimes it's out of their control why they do. Maybe it's puberty, maybe it's maturity, maybe it's a certain skill set that's not developed yet, and that area or that level targets improving those things so that the athlete can transition. But what has happened is, it has caused another level of stress. It's caused another level of stress of, my neighbor plays this level, why don't I? My neighbor plays this level, why don't I? And really, what's been a focus of ours to provide the right environment at the right time wherever your family is, has turned into people using that incorrectly and using those labels incorrectly. And so it's a perfect example you gave there, Chris. We want to provide those levels for a very specific purpose, to help a young man or woman work through the transitions that they're going to be faced with. They're going to be faced with it. My son, has traditionally been a late developer, and at times he's lined up with a certain team and then he's been moved to a different level and moved around. Like, if I look at that with a very negative short-term look, then I'm going to, get defensive, get frustrated, feel like he's getting the short side of it. If I look at it from a very long-term vision, which we have, we can see when that has helped propel him through one of those transitions. And so I really appreciate, Chris, you sharing that, because sometimes I think that that's looked at as a negative. It's looked at as, you just want to have a certain number of teams, you just want to grow, and the frank answer of that is, that's not the case. It's really to allow for a family and an athlete to work through a transition that they're stuck in. So that forever home concept. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah. I think a great example of that, Brett, just happened. I mean, for us a few months ago, I think back to we had we do our senior signing ceremony that we do every year, celebrating our athletes. And I can't remember the exact number, but we had 40 or so athletes that we celebrated that were, graduating out of our program and going on to play college ball. And not all 40 of those athletes were on the national team or the top level team for as they were coming up through our club. And so I think that's just one small example of if the process is what's important. If what's important to a family is, I've got to be on the top team for whatever club or whatever organization I'm part of, then there's going to be a lot of stress. There's going to be a lot of jumping, and you may be able to find that eventually. You'll find that spot on that top team in that whatever club you end up finding. But I don't know that the process and the journey is going to be a quality one at the end of the day. Whereas, like, if you can just focus on the process, not worried about the necessarily the level that I'm at, but the process of, my athlete wants to, play at a high level in high school, wants to get an opportunity to play in college, and like all that can happen at the end of the day. But it doesn't have to be by, trying to fit it into this, perfect box that we think we need. It doesn't need to be that way. It kind of goes back to the process part of it.
And I think it takes special families to trust in that process, because even one of the families that was at that meeting we keep referencing is, I remember very clearly as a softball player's journey that she didn't make our program in 12U, and then she was on a 12U. We called it 12U Futures at the time. She was then on a 14U Futures. She was on a 14U Gold. She was then on a 16U Gold. And then she was on an 18U national team. And so for her journey was always just climbing this ladder. But it took a lot of conversations with that family about where she was at that time every single year, of like, they could have been upset, like, oh, we're not on the top team, we're just going to go somewhere else. But instead, they really trusted in the fact that, like, we did have a vision for her long-term journey. And if she kept putting in the work and figuring out how to keep jumping over some of those hurdles that she had in front of her and working through them, then she was going to get to the goals that she had. And that could be at whatever level made the most sense for her. Doesn't mean that everybody's going to end up, like you said, it could be that they end up on the top team, but it might not. And for her, it was, but I think just even the muddiness of her journey to get there was really a lot of just trust from the family, that they easily could have just jumped ship at any point.
Okay, let's shift. Let's shift away from the family and athlete side, and let's shift to the coaches and directors. Why is this forever home concept important for coaches and directors? Who would like to start with that
one? I think, like, it goes all the way back to when we were talking about the right way to play. Like, there's a foundation that is, like, created at such a young age within our program. So I think myself coaching predominantly like 16, 18U over the last however many years, I see the kids that get to us that have been a part of our program all the way. And I've also seen kids that, like, have gotten recruited in within the last 1 to 2 years. And so having that basis of culture and that foundation of, like, we are doing things differently helps the coaches at the older ages, I think, other than feeling like they, I don't know if start over is the right word there, but it's this foundation of, like, you are building a family within this home, and for them to go through their trials and tribulations together through that 8U, 10U, and so on. It really allows us to focus on their goals then at 16U and 18U, because we're not having to play catch up of, like, yeah, we don't do that here with some of the culture things that maybe they've been accustomed to that haven't been corrected at that 12U, 14U age. I think on the coach side of it, that's probably what I feel the most of, what that looks like for me at 16U, 18U type of levels.
But yes, totally agree with that. Let me take another spin on it though too. Coaches, we can fall trap to that same noise, right? We can fall trap, to the short-term focus, or the constant changing focus. Chris, do you feel like this forever home concept also holds us accountable at the coach level and the director level to, stick to that journey?
Absolutely. I think that, especially when we're talking about sports, and specifically the sports of baseball and softball, like, those are very late developing sports, right? Very late developing sports. So, like, I think that, we have these conversations frequently with our coaches at the youth level. At a young age, if you start to get into, like, well, I just need the best players now, and I need to win now, and I need to, sometimes you're going to, that may force you to, pass on or move on from a family that's a quality family that gets the journey, or an athlete that, just needs a little bit of time, and they're going to, they're going to catch up, and they're going to surpass some of their teammates, and so I think that, like, that it's hard to stay on that path sometimes. Because I've got this, to use whatever an example, I've got this 8-year-old that quite frankly is just bigger than everybody else. So like he's a stud, and he's he's the kid we need on our team, but maybe his focus, the family's focus, is not long term, is not it's not cultural, it's not and then maybe we have an athlete that's the opposite, is just a little undersized, is a little bit unathletic, but has the right mindset, has the right family. Like, give them a few years, they're going to catch up. And so a lot of times we jump to want to be, to get to those end goals super, super early, and so it's just, that's one example that, I talk to a lot about our coaches. Like, yes, we want to win at a young age, but the reality is a lot of times the teams that win at a young age don't usually end up being the same teams that win at an old age. And it's because of a lot of, like, we miss the culture stuff. We miss the development stuff. We get to the winning part too quickly, and then we don't play the long game enough. So I think that leads to the, the forever home concept of, like, how do we keep what we have for 10 years, not just 1 or 2.
Yep. That's great. I think the forever home concept, it targets both sides of the equation. It helps families, feel like they can find a home. When you mentioned that family earlier, Jess, that softball family, very easily they could jump, just like you said, and go find an easier path. But through the relationships and through the trust and through the programs, laying out that long-term journey, they won. They won because they got out in a really positive spot. And that's the same thing with coaches. Helping coaches and directors understand that building something for that long term is frankly more rewarding than the random weekend when your son or daughter's 9 and chasing a trophy during that time. So that's great. Specifically in the Forever Home initiative or theme, we've broken it in 3 parts: coaches that care, trainers that develop, and directors that support. And each of those areas being, instrumental to ultimately developing a forever home. So maybe let's each take one of those. I'll take coaches that care. Jess, you take trainers that develop, and Chris, you can take directors that support. We'll just share a little bit on that. These are the 3 foundations that lead up to what we hope to support families and coaches better with this, which is that forever home concept. The first one, coaches that care. I remember talking to one of our directors this summer, and there were some teams that were having some success that was on paper a little bit surprising. And maybe on paper those teams didn't look like they were going to be the most successful teams in our club. And I remember asking that director, what are you seeing with those teams? What's leading to that success? And that director shared and said they have coaches that care, and the coaches make it important. They make it memorable. They make it valuable. They make it a positive experience. They build passion. They build confidence. They build hunger. Coaches that care has components of IQ and X's and O's, but it also has components of personal growth and mentoring and ultimately caring in the player caring in the person more than the player. It's an athlete focused mindset, and so we know that we have to have coaches that care to be able to provide that forever home. Jess, Chris, who wants to go next?
The trainers that develop section, I think, plays right into what Chris was talking about earlier about the long game of we're trying to develop kids long term. So our roadmap of training matches our roadmap of that forever home. So there's going to be curriculum and transitions and things that kids are going through. And so our trainers are working to be the experts in their skill so that they can then understand what those transitions look like for the athletes and how to get the most out of them. So there's things we talk about as far as approach and the actual skill and the mental side of it. And it's just all encompassing a holistic type of program within our training to really develop athletes for that long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that when it comes to the director area, one, I do think that it's kind of like building blocks. Like, one, you have to have coaches that care. I mean, any family would tell you, you could have organizational support, you could have training, you can have all the things that make up a great club, but at the end of the day, if their athlete's not impacted by a coach that truly cares about them, that's probably a deal breaker at the end of the day. So you got the coaches that care. You got to have development, right? If we're going into a club situation or a select situation, we're going there because we want our athlete to develop in the game. They have a love for the game. We want them to develop in it. It's like those two things are vitally important. Directors are there to make sure that those things stay on track, right? Directors have to make sure that, our coaches, we have coaches that do care and that they are developing and growing alongside their families, and that we do have development that's happening and that it's happening in the right way. So they're like the guiding light for those things, the overseer for those things, the person that a coach can pick up the phone and get on the horn with and talk about an issue or talk about a best practice or whatever, can go to a coach's clinic and can be fed things. So I think that like the director's role is just like to make sure that those two foundational areas are happening, and that they're moving forward. Especially when you're talking a big club, a large organization, like, it can't be individual people all acting on their own accord. There's got to be some oversight that makes sure everybody's moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great. Let's finish up with some, kind of maybe speaking more specific to families that, let's first talk about the group of families that have already started making, Extreme their forever home. So you mentioned a family earlier, Jess. They were around for whatever that was, 6-7 years. Let's think about those families that have been in the Extreme for 5+ years. What are some common traits? What are some common things they experience? How have they made it to forever home? How have they worked through that? What would you share on those commonalities?
I'll go first, Jess.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah. So I think I think it goes back to the things we just talked about. I think that they would all say that they had a coach or coaches throughout their journey that truly cared about them, right? They cared about their athlete, they cared about their family, cared about the journey, cared about them, as a ball player, but also as just a human being. And so I think that would be number one. And then number two, I think that they would talk about development and the opportunities for development. They would talk about, their athlete improving in the game, and that being, part of that being the development that they got from their trainers inside the club, from whether it was facilities provided or technology provided. Like, I think that they would talk about those things. And I think the last thing they would talk about is something that probably goes to like the legacy piece. They would talk about like that they still come back and they give back, or they would talk about that they're still in contact with those people, or they're in college now and they still get to come into the facility and get their work in. So I think they would talk about that. So they talk about the coaches, the care, the development their athlete received, and then just that they still feel like it's a home.
Yeah,
Anything to build up that?
Yeah, like the traits of the family in general, like even before those types of things are provided to them, I would say families that are growth minded and that almost like humble enough to be impacted. To me, those traits are really important. Like, you have to be growth minded enough to want that education. You have to feel like you can get to a place to trust the process from experts who have done this for 25+ years. So just being able to get poured into really allows you to see those coaches that care, the trainers that develop, and it all builds on each other. But at the foundation of your family, you gotta desire that.
And would you guys agree that probably another commonality is that it was hard at some point? They had to work through a hard conversation, decision. They had to, make the least popular choice. What could you guys share on that?
Yeah, I think willingness to sacrifice for goals is what I think of whenever you're talking about, like, when as an athlete and you kind of live in this like lonely world of I might not be going to the football game on Friday night because I might have training, going all the way back to what you guys are doing this weekend. Like, I think that when you as a family can understand that there is going to be challenges ahead, but you have a willingness to work through those challenges, there's always going to be fruit on the other side of that.
Yeah, I think it's the scrapbook concept, right? Like any type of a long-term relationship you have, whether it's with your family or your husband and wife or whatever, when you look at it over the long term, right? Can you look back and can you look through a scrapbook of all the highlights and does that far outweigh the hard times or the rough times or the tough decisions or whatever? Because I think that with any long-term relationship, that stuff is going to happen, right? There's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be tough decisions to make. But when you look back on it all, well, you look at that scrapbook and be like, that was a positive thing for me in my life. And I think that's the way it's got to be. That's the way it's got to be viewed.
Mm-hmm. And let's just finish up with, the families that are new and, are coming to Extreme and looking for a forever home or looking for something a little bit more long-term. What do you guys hear from them? What's the word or the phrase or the desire or the reason that, has brought them to us in their journey?
Alleviating stress is probably the biggest thing, because people come to us all the time. Tryout season is so stressful. Like, if you have a home, that shouldn't be a stressful season for you, because you have been communicated to by that coach that cares about what the journey looks like, and you have a development plan with your trainer. You have all of the support that you need to not feel like all of the transitions are stressful. So I think new families feel a sense of peace around, I don't have to stress during this time of year because this is my home and these people have me and they have my best interest. They have my kids' best interest at heart of how to help them towards their goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's just being part of something bigger. I think that families in youth sports crave that, being part of something bigger, that it's not just, it's not just on me as a family to make sure I'm making all the right decisions for my athlete. I need support in that. And then again, even if I was on a team or in another situation where I felt like my experience was solely dictated by, like, maybe one or two people, maybe the head coach, maybe, when I am part of an organization that has, many people involved and many coaches involved and people trying to move in the right direction, that paints a broader picture and allows, for families to feel like they're going to be supported through the journey and not have to feel like, they're relying on, this one, situation to be right for them.
Yep. Well, that was fun. That was great. That was enjoyable to hear you two go into depth on, where did the forever home concept come from? What are we targeting as a program to try to provide the families, the athletes, the coaches, the directors, and ultimately, I would say as we enter into year 25. It's a constant evolution of improvement, and that evolution doesn't change. These things that, we are striving for, we know that, sometimes it's being done very well. Sometimes it's not being executed correctly. And, that constant commitment to trying to improve it, do it better. And ultimately, the reason why is that we want to stay athlete focused. We want the athlete to be at the center of that. And this is we want that forever home for that athlete. We want that athlete to be in the right spot at the right time for their journey. So yeah, it was super fruitful today to hear you two go into deeper descriptions and examples and concepts. So thank you very much. Jess, where can people find you on Instagram? Chris, you can follow up.
At Jess and 829.
At Coach Fair 85.
All right, so go follow Coach Jess, Coach Chris, and see their efforts in providing that forever home. Thank you, everybody, for listening today to Hardball Talks. Hopefully, you can see the passion of these directors coming out and the efforts that they put into trying to provide the correct youth sports experience so that not only will our athletes have a positive experience now, but as they get old, they will continue to be tied into this club and ultimately their purpose with the Lord. So thank you so much for both of you joining today.